The fertility clinic's waiting room had become as familiar as their own living room. Bridget sat beside Leo, her hand resting on his knee, thumb tracing gentle circles through the fabric of his jeans. 3 years of marriage, 2 years of trying, and countless appointments had brought them here again. "Mr. and Mrs. Garrett?" The nurse's voice cut through the sterile silence. Leo's jaw tightened as they followed her down the hallway. Bridget squeezed his hand, feeling the tension radiating from him like heat from a furnace. She'd seen the test results weeks ago, had seen them, and made a choice that now felt like carrying a stone in her chest. The papers were hidden in her jewelry box at home, Leo's name printed clearly at the top, the diagnosis stark and unforgiving. Azoospermia, complete absence of sperm. Dr. Mitchell's office smelled of leather and disinfectant. "I'm afraid the results aren't what we hoped for," he began, his eyes finding Bridget's before shifting to Leo. "The issue appears to be male factor infertility." But Bridget had already intercepted those results. She'd called the office, explained she'd handle sharing the news with her husband, requested they run additional tests on her instead. The staff, sympathetic to what they assumed was a wife trying to protect her husband's feelings, had complied. "Actually, doctor," Bridget said softly, her heart hammering against her ribs, "I think you'll find the problem is with me." The drive home was silent except for the radio playing softly between them. Leo stared out the passenger window while Bridget drove, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. She'd bought them time. Time for what, she wasn't sure. Time for Leo to process, maybe. Time for her to figure out how to tell him the truth without destroying him. That evening, Leo sat at their kitchen table, a beer growing warm in his hands. 2 years, Bridget. 2 goddamn years of thinking maybe next month, maybe this time. "I know." She set down her tea and reached for his hand. "I know it's hard." "Hard?" He pulled away. "It's not hard, it's impossible. You're broken and you've been letting me think." He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "God, all this time I've been thinking it was just bad luck." The word broken hit her like a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold in their warm kitchen. "Leo, What kind of wife lets her husband go through this without saying anything? 2 years of hope for nothing." "It doesn't change anything between us," she whispered. "We can adopt. We can—" "Doesn't change anything." Leo's laugh was bitter. "Are you serious? Of course it changes things. I married you thinking we'd have a family, real children, not someone else's cast-offs." Bridget flinched. "Adopted children aren't cast-offs. They're not mine." Leo stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "They're not us. Don't you understand? I wanted to see my eyes in my kid's face. I wanted to teach my son to throw a baseball the way my dad taught me." "And you can still do that. Love makes a family, Leo, not genetics." "Easy for you to say. You're the one who broke this." He grabbed his keys from the counter. "I need air." The front door slammed, leaving Bridget alone with the echo of his words. She sat there until her tea grew cold, until the kitchen fell into darkness, until she heard his car return hours later. He slept in the guest room that night. The following weeks blurred together in a haze of stilted conversations and careful distances. Leo threw himself into work, staying late at the construction company he managed, coming home only to eat dinner in silence before disappearing into his home office. Bridget tried to bridge the growing chasm between them, but every attempt was met with cool politeness or barely contained resentment. "You should have told me," became his refrain. "You should have been honest from the beginning." How could she explain that she'd been protecting him? That she'd seen how his father's abandonment when Leo was 12 had left him questioning his own worth as a man? That she'd known, with the certainty of loving someone completely, that learning about his infertility would shatter something fundamental in him? 3 months after that devastating appointment, Leo came home with papers. "Divorce?" Bridget stared at the documents spread across their dining room table. "Leo, please, we can work through this." "Can we?" He loosened his tie, looking older than his 32 years. "Because I've been trying, Bridget. I've been trying to look at you and not think about how you lied to me. About how you let me make a fool of myself hoping for something that was never going to happen. I didn't lie, You kept the truth from me. Same thing. He sat across from her, his wedding ring catching the light. I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that finding out my wife is infertile doesn't matter to me, because it does. I wanted children, our children, and that's never going to happen now. So our marriage meant nothing. The question came out smaller than she'd intended. It meant something, but not enough to make up for this. He pushed the papers toward her. I've already signed them. Bridget's hands shook as she picked up the documents. 5 years together, 3 years married, and it came down to her signature on a legal form. What about counselling? What about trying to... I've made up my mind. Leo's voice was final. I'm sorry, Bridget, I really am. But I can't forgive this. She signed the papers that night while Leo packed a bag. He'd be staying at his buddy Mike's place until he found an apartment. The sound of his suitcase wheels on their hardwood floor would haunt her for months afterward. For what it's worth, he said at the door, I did love you. Past tense. As if their love had died the moment she'd tried to protect him from a truth she'd known would destroy them anyway. After he left, Bridget sat in their living room, her living room now, surrounded by the life they'd built together. Wedding photos smiled at her from the mantel. His coffee mug still sat in the sink. The throw pillow he always complained about but never moved was still positioned exactly where she liked it on the couch. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Leo's mother's number. Edith had been more than a mother-in-law. She'd been the mother Bridget had lost to cancer 5 years earlier. But calling her now felt like salt in an open wound. Instead, she opened her jewelry box and pulled out the envelope she'd hidden there months ago. Dr. Mitchell's letterhead, Leo's name, his test results. The truth that might have saved their marriage if she'd been brave enough to share it, or brave enough to let him discover it himself. But she'd loved him too much to let him face that kind of blow to his masculine pride. And now she'd lost him anyway. Bridget held the papers over the kitchen trash can for a long moment before sliding them back into the envelope. Someday, maybe, he'd need to know. But not today. Today, she just needed to figure out how to live in a world where loving someone completely hadn't been enough. Chapter 2. Picking up the pieces. 6 months after the divorce, Bridget stood in the doorway of a small apartment in Millbrook, 3 hours away from everything she'd known. The moving truck had just pulled away, leaving her with boxes stacked like cardboard monuments to her fresh start. She'd taken a job as a marketing coordinator for a small firm, a step down from her previous position, but enough to begin again. The apartment was bright and cheerful, with large windows overlooking a tree-lined street. Nothing like the house she'd shared with Leo, which had been all dark wood and masculine touches. This place was hers. Cream-coloured walls she could paint any colour she wanted. Space for the plants Leo had always complained about. Room for the life she was determined to build from the ruins of her marriage. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Meredith back home. Call me when you get a chance. Important. Bridget set down the box of kitchen supplies she'd been unpacking and dialed. Thank God, Meredith said without preamble. I wasn't sure if you'd changed your number. Just moved yesterday. What's going on? It's about Edith. Meredith's voice grew careful. She's sick, Bridge. Really sick. Bridget sank onto her new couch, still wrapped in plastic. What kind of sick? Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors are saying maybe 6 months. The box cutter fell from Bridget's hand. Edith Garrett had been 68, vibrant, the kind of woman who still climbed ladders to clean her own gutters. Is Leo Dash? That's why I'm calling. Meredith's voice turned hard. He's not helping. At all. Edith called me last week asking if I knew any home health aides. Can you believe it? Her own son won't even return her calls. Bridget closed her eyes. Leo's relationship with his mother had always been complicated, strained further when Edith had made her feelings about the divorce crystal clear. She'd called Leo selfish and foolish, told him he was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to him. He'd stopped speaking to her entirely after that conversation. "What can I do?" Bridget asked, though she already knew the answer. "She needs someone, Bridge. Someone who cares about her. I've been checking on her when I can, but I've got the kids and Mark's traveling so much." 3 days later, Bridget was back in her old town, standing on Edith's front porch with a suitcase and a leave of absence from her new job. The woman who answered the door was a shadow of the vibrant mother-in-law she remembered. Edith had lost at least 30 pounds, her silver hair thin and patchy from chemotherapy, her skin the colour of old parchment. "Oh, sweetheart," Edith's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." Bridget stepped inside and wrapped her arms around the woman who had never stopped feeling like family, divorce papers notwithstanding. The house smelled like sickness and loneliness. Prescription bottles lined the kitchen counter, and the refrigerator held little more than expired yogurt and wilted lettuce. Bridget rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She established routines, morning medications with toast and weak coffee, afternoon walks when Edith felt strong enough, evening movies on the couch with homemade soup and herbal tea. She drove Edith to chemotherapy appointments, holding her hand during the treatments and helping her to the car afterward when the nausea hit. "You don't owe me this," Edith said one afternoon as Bridget helped her into bed after a particularly rough chemo session. "I love you," Bridget replied simply. "That didn't stop when the marriage ended. My son is a fool." "Your son is hurt," Bridget pulled the blankets up to Edith's chin. "And stubborn. He gets that from you." Edith managed a weak smile. "I raised that boy to be better than this, to honor his commitments, to take care of the people he loves. I failed somewhere." "You didn't fail. Sometimes good people make bad choices when they're in pain. He chose wrong when he let you go." Bridget didn't respond. What was there to say? That Leo had blamed her for something that wasn't her fault? That she'd lied to him, in a way, by keeping the truth hidden? That they'd both made mistakes that led to the end of their marriage? As Edith's condition worsened, Bridget found herself sleeping in the guest room more often than driving back to her apartment. She took a permanent leave from her new job, living off her savings and the small amount she'd received in the divorce settlement. Edith protested, but weakly. They both knew she needed the help. "I tried calling him again," Edith admitted one evening as Bridget prepared her medications. "Leo, I left him a voicemail." Bridget's hands stilled on the pill organizer. "What did you say?" "That I'm dying. That I'd like to see my son before I go." Edith's voice was matter-of-fact, but Bridget could hear the hurt underneath. That was 2 weeks ago. The silence stretched between them. Bridget had seen Leo twice since moving back, once at the grocery store, where he'd pretended not to see her, and once at a traffic light where their eyes had met briefly before he'd looked away. Both times her heart had clenched with a mixture of love and loss that time hadn't dulled. "He's scared," Bridget said finally. "He doesn't know how to face losing you." "Then he's going to lose me without saying goodbye, and he'll regret that for the rest of his life." November brought the first real cold snap, and with it, Edith's final decline. The woman who had once intimidated door-to-door salesmen with her sharp wit now slept 18 hours a day, waking only for sips of water and whispered conversations. "Promise me something," Edith said one afternoon, her voice barely audible. Bridget leaned closer. "Anything." "When I'm gone, look after him. He's going to be lost without me, even if he won't admit it. He's still my little boy, the one who cried when his goldfish died and made me hold a funeral in the backyard. Edith, promise me." Her grip on Bridget's hand was surprisingly strong. He'll need someone who knows how to love him right, someone who understands that his anger comes from fear. Bridget's throat tightened. "I promise." Edith died on a Tuesday morning in early December, quietly, with Bridget holding her hand. The funeral home came, then the hospice nurse to sign papers. Bridget called Meredith, then Edith's sister in Florida, Then, finally, with shaking fingers, she called Leo. "What do you want?" His voice was cold. "Your mother died this morning." The silence on the other end stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. Finally, "When's the funeral?" "Friday at 2, St. Matthew's." "Fine." The line went dead. Bridget stared at the phone, then at the empty room where Edith had spent her final days. She'd kept her promise to be there at the end. Now she had another promise to keep, one that seemed impossible given the hatred in Leo's voice. But she'd promised, and if there was one thing Bridget understood about love, it was that real love didn't end just because it got difficult. The funeral was small, a handful of Edith's friends, her sister Meredith and Leo, who sat in the front pew alone, his face carved from stone. Bridget sat 3 rows back, close enough to see his shoulders shake during the eulogy, far enough away to respect the wall he'd built between them. After the service, as people filtered out to the reception hall, Leo approached her in the church vestibule. "Thank you," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes, "for taking care of her." "She loved you," Bridget replied. "Even when she was angry, she loved you." Leo's jaw worked silently. For a moment she thought he might say something more, might acknowledge the year of care she'd given his mother while he'd nursed his pride. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone among the flowers and condolence cards. But Bridget remembered Edith's words, her final request. Leo might not want her in his life, but she'd promised to look after him. And sometimes, looking after someone meant protecting them from truths that would destroy them. The envelope in her jewelry box back in Millbrook suddenly felt heavier than ever. Chapter 3. The New Family Illusion. 2 years after his mother's funeral, Leo Garrett stood in the maternity ward of St. Mary's Hospital, staring through the nursery window at a baby boy with his wife's dark hair and what he chose to believe were his own eyes. The nameplate read, Michael James Garrett, and Leo felt a pride so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. "He's perfect," whispered Sarah, his wife of 18 months. At 26, she was 8 years younger than Leo, with the kind of effortless beauty that turned heads in restaurants and made other men envious. She'd started as a receptionist at his construction company, all long legs and bright smiles, and had somehow seen something in the divorced, bitter man he'd become after Bridget. "He's everything," Leo agreed, pressing his palm against the glass. "Look at those hands. He's going to be strong." Sarah beamed up at him, exhaustion making her eyes soft. "Just like his daddy." The words sent a surge of masculine satisfaction through Leo's chest. After years of believing he was somehow less than other men, here was proof of his virility, his worth. A son. His son. The boy he'd dreamed of having with Bridget but never could because she... He stopped that train of thought. He'd worked hard to bury the guilt and second-guessing that had plagued him after the divorce. Dr. Mitchell had been clear. The fertility issues were with Bridget, not him. This baby was living proof. "Mr. Garrett," a nurse appeared beside them. "Would you like to hold him?" Leo nodded, not trusting his voice. When the nurse placed Michael in his arms, the baby's weight seemed to settle something deep in his chest that had been restless for years. This was what he'd been missing. This was what made a man complete. Sarah recovered quickly, eager to show off their son. Within days of bringing Michael home, their house was filled with visitors bearing gifts and congratulations. Leo found himself telling the story over and over, how Sarah had surprised him with the pregnancy news, how they'd married quickly in a small ceremony, how perfectly everything had worked out. "You're a natural," Mike, Leo's best friend and best man, said one evening as Leo fed Michael a bottle. "Kid's lucky to have you as a dad." "I'm the lucky one," Leo replied, watching his son's tiny fist curl around his finger. "I never thought this would happen for me." What he didn't say, what he tried not to think about, was how different this felt from his marriage to Bridget. With her, every month without a pregnancy had been a failure, a source of tension, and ultimately blame. With Sarah, conception had happened almost immediately after their wedding. It seemed to confirm everything he'd told himself about where the problem had really been. Sarah settled into motherhood with apparent ease, though Leo noticed she seemed more interested in the social aspects of having a baby than the day-to-day care. She loved dressing Michael in expensive outfits for photos, enjoyed the attention they received when out in public, but seemed relieved when Leo took over diaper duty or middle-of-the-night feedings. "You're so good with him," she'd say, handing Michael over whenever he fussed. "He just wants his daddy." Leo didn't mind. If anything, he loved feeling needed, loved being the parent Michael turned to for comfort. It validated everything he'd believed about himself as a father, that he would have been good at it, if only Bridget hadn't been unable to give him the chance. The construction business was booming, and Leo threw himself into expanding it. He wanted to provide well for his new family, to build something substantial to pass down to Michael someday. Sarah seemed happy with their comfortable lifestyle, the renovated house, the new SUV, the designer clothes that filled her walk-in closet. "We should have another one soon," she said one evening as they watched Michael sleep in his crib. "Maybe a girl this time." Leo felt that familiar surge of masculine pride. "You think so?" Sarah pressed against him, her hand trailing down his chest. "I love seeing you as a father. You were made for this." He was made for this. After years of doubt and shame, he finally felt like the man he was supposed to be. News of Leo's marriage and fatherhood filtered back to Bridget through their old mutual friends. Meredith, ever loyal, had tried to spare her the details, but eventually the truth came out over a phone call that left Bridget staring at her apartment wall for an hour afterward. "He has a son," she said to her empty living room, testing the words. They felt surreal. Leo, infertile Leo, whose condition was so severe that natural conception was medically impossible, had fathered a child. The envelope was still in her jewelry box, its contents unchanged despite the years. Bridget pulled it out that night and reread the medical report by lamplight, checking and double-checking the diagnosis that had started the end of her marriage. There was no mistake, no ambiguity in the language. Leo's condition was absolute, which meant Michael wasn't his son. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Some other man had fathered the child Leo was undoubtedly loving with his whole heart. Sarah was either unaware of the truth or hiding it deliberately. Either way, Leo was living a lie that would eventually destroy him. Bridget's first instinct was to call him, to warn him somehow. But what could she say? That she'd hidden his medical diagnosis for years? That she'd lied by omission during their marriage? That his new wife was either cheating or had cheated? She put the papers away and tried to focus on her own life. She'd built something good in Millbrook, a small marketing consultancy that was finally turning a profit, a circle of friends who knew nothing about her past, a quiet contentment that felt like healing. Getting involved in Leo's life again would only bring pain for everyone. But Edith's dying words haunted her. "Look after him. He's going to be lost without me." Leo might be happy now, but that happiness was built on a foundation of lies. When the truth came out, and in Bridget's experience, the truth always came out eventually, he would be devastated. The man who had divorced her for supposedly lying about her fertility was now living the ultimate lie about his own. The irony was almost too painful to bear. Months passed. Bridget heard occasional updates through the gossip network. Leo's business was thriving, Michael was walking early, Sarah was already talking about baby number 2. Each piece of news felt like a stone in her chest. Then, on a cold February morning almost 3 years after her divorce, Bridget made a decision that would change everything. She drove the 3 hours back to her old town, Leo's medical records in her purse, and parked outside the house that had once been half hers. It looked different now. Fresh paint, new landscaping, a minivan in the driveway alongside Leo's truck. Through the front window, she could see him lifting a toddler, Michael, into the air, both of them laughing. Bridget sat in her car for 20 minutes, watching the family Leo had built, the happiness she'd never been able to give him. Finally, she put the car in drive and headed home. But she kept the envelope, because somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this wouldn't last. And when it fell apart, when Leo's world came crashing down around him, she would be there to help him pick up the pieces. It was what Edith would have wanted. It was what love looked like, even when that love went unrecognized and unappreciated. Bridget had learned to live with being the guardian of truths that others couldn't handle. But watching Leo's joy from a distance, knowing it was built on impossibility, was almost more than she could bear. The truth would come out eventually. It always did. And when it did, Leo would need someone who understood the real weight of keeping secrets for love, whether he wanted her help or not. Chapter 4. The Revelation. 4 years after his mother's funeral, Leo Garrett opened his front door to find his ex-wife standing on his porch, an envelope clutched in her hands. She looked older. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage, and her dark hair was shorter, more businesslike. But she was still beautiful in that quiet way that had first caught his attention at a mutual friend's barbecue a decade ago. "Didn't I tell you to get lost?" The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but seeing Bridget brought back a flood of resentment he thought he'd buried. Behind him, he could hear Sarah calling to Michael something about lunch and nap time. Bridget didn't flinch at his tone. She simply reached into the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper, holding it out to him with steady hands. "What is this?" But even as he asked, Leo's eyes were scanning the document. Letterhead from Dr. Mitchell's office, his name at the top. Test results dated 5 years ago, during their marriage. The words seemed to rearrange themselves on the page as he read. Azoospermia. Complete absence of sperm. Patient shows no viable sperm production. Natural conception impossible. "Where did you get this?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "I've had it since our 2nd year of marriage," Bridget said quietly. "The doctor's office sent it to me by mistake, and I asked them to run additional tests on me instead. I told them I'd discuss the results with you." Leo's hands began to shake. "This is fake. You had this made up because you're bitter about Sarah and Michael." "Call Dr. Mitchell's office," Bridget interrupted. "Ask them to send you a copy. The file number is right there." The paper crackled in his grip. Behind him, Sarah's voice grew closer. "Leo? Who's at the door?" "You've had this for 7 years." The timeline was becoming clear, horrifyingly clear. "During our entire marriage, you knew I was—" He couldn't say the word. "I knew." Bridget's voice was steady, but he could see tears gathering in her eyes. "And I hid it because I loved you, because I knew what it would do to you to find out. So you let me blame you instead." The accusations he'd hurled at her, the cruel words about her being broken, defective, they all came rushing back like acid in his throat. "I was going to tell you eventually. I just needed to find the right time, the right way. But when you started blaming me, when you said it changed how you felt about me." She shrugged helplessly. "I realized there would never be a right time." Sarah appeared beside him, Michael balanced on her hip. The 3-year-old had Leo's dark hair but Sarah's green eyes that were now wide with confusion and growing alarm. "Bridget," Sarah said, her voice tight, "what are you doing here?" "She's just leaving," Leo said, but his voice lacked conviction. The paper in his hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "No, I'm not." Bridget's tone remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Leo, you need to understand what this means." Sarah shifted Michael to her other hip, moving closer to Leo's side. "What's going on?" "What is that?" Leo looked at the paper again, the words swimming before him. Natural conception impossible. But Michael was right there, solid and real, and calling him Daddy. "It means," Bridget said, her eyes never leaving Leo's face, "that Michael isn't your biological son." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah gasped, clutching Michael tighter. "That's ridiculous. Leo, tell her she's crazy." But Leo was staring at his son, at Sarah's son, seeing him with new eyes. The green eyes that had never quite looked like his own. The facial structure that he'd convinced himself was Sarah's, but that now seemed completely foreign. The way Michael sometimes looked at him with polite distance rather than the bone-deep recognition Leo had assumed was natural between father and son. "Why?" Leo's voice came out as a whisper. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because your mother asked me to look after you," Bridget replied. "Before she died, she made me promise to take care of her son. This is me keeping that promise." "Your mother?" Sarah's voice rose an octave. "What does your dead mother have to do with anything?" Leo ignored her, focused entirely on Bridget. "You've known this whole time. While I was celebrating becoming a father, while I was—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "While you were happy," Bridget finished gently. "Yes, I knew. And it killed me to watch you build your joy on something that wasn't real. But I also remembered what it felt like to love you, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy that happiness. Until now." "Until now," she agreed. "Because living a lie isn't really living at all. And because you deserve to know the truth, even if it hurts." Sarah was shaking her head frantically. "This is insane. Leo, you can't believe this. She's obviously lying, trying to break up our marriage because she's jealous." Leo looked at his wife, really looked at her. The panic in her eyes wasn't the confusion of an innocent woman being falsely accused. It was the terror of someone whose secret had been exposed. "How long?" he asked Sarah. "Leo, don't—" "How long were you cheating on me?" Sarah's face crumpled. "It wasn't like that. It was before we got married, just a few times. It didn't mean anything." "But you knew?" Leo's voice was getting stronger, anger replacing shock. "When you told me you were pregnant, you knew there was a chance Michael wasn't mine." "I hoped. I thought maybe—" "You thought what? That I was too stupid to figure it out?" Michael began to cry, sensing the tension in the adults around him. Sarah bounced him absently, her attention focused on the disaster unfolding in front of her. "I love you," she said desperately. "We have a good life together. Michael loves you. You're the only father he's ever known." Built on a lie. Leo turned back to Bridget, who had been watching the exchange with sad eyes. "And you kept my medical records, why? As insurance? Something to hold over me?" "Because I knew this day would come," Bridget said simply. "Because lies have a way of revealing themselves, and when they did, I wanted you to understand that I never lied to you. I protected you. There's a difference." Leo stared at the paper in his hands, then at the woman who had hidden his infertility to spare his pride, then at the wife who had hidden another man's child to secure her future. The contrast was so stark, it took his breath away. "I need you both to leave," he said finally. "Leo," Sarah started. "Now." His voice cracked like a whip. "Take Michael and go to your sister's. We'll talk later." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She gathered the diaper bag with shaking hands while Michael continued to fuss. "This doesn't have to ruin everything," she said as she reached the door. "We can work through this." Leo didn't respond. He was staring at Bridget, trying to reconcile the woman who had sacrificed their marriage to protect his ego with the woman who had just destroyed his second marriage to save his sanity. "Why now?" he asked again when Sarah's car had disappeared down the street. "Because I finally understood that protecting someone from the truth isn't the same as loving them," Bridget replied. "I should have told you about your test results years ago. Maybe we couldn't have had biological children, but we could have built something real together. Instead, I made the choice for both of us." Leo sank onto his front step, the medical report still clutched in his hand. 7 years. 7 years of believing I was defective, then believing I was vindicated. And it was all— "You were never defective," Bridget said firmly. "You were just facing something difficult, something that lots of couples face. But I was too scared of losing you to let you face it." "So you lost me anyway?" "Yes." She sat beside him on the step, careful to maintain distance between them. "I lost you anyway." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of revealed truths settling between them like sediment in still water. "What am I supposed to do now?" Leo asked finally. "Whatever you need to do," Bridget replied, "but you'll do it knowing the truth. All of it." She stood to leave, then paused. "Your mother was right, you know, about me looking after you. Even when you hated me, even when you blamed me for things that weren't my fault, I never stopped caring about what happened to you." Leo watched her walk to her car. This woman who had loved him enough to sacrifice their marriage for his pride, then loved him enough to destroy his illusions for his freedom. As her taillights disappeared around the corner, he looked down at the paper in his hands, evidence of a truth that changed everything and nothing at all. Inside the house, Michael's toys were scattered across the living room floor. Photos of their happy family smiled down from the mantel. The life Leo had built, the identity he had crafted, the joy he had felt, all of it suddenly seemed as insubstantial as morning mist. But for the first time in years, he knew exactly where he stood. The truth, however devastating, was solid ground beneath his feet. Chapter 5. The Truth Unveiled. Leo sat in his truck outside the medical lab staring at the small vial in his hand. 3 days had passed since Bridget's revelation, 3 days of sleepless nights and avoided phone calls from Sarah. The paternity test kit felt heavier than it should, this simple collection of cotton swabs that would either confirm his worst fears or prove that Bridget had somehow fabricated an elaborate lie. But deep down, he already knew. The pieces that had never quite fit were suddenly clicking into place with horrible clarity. Sarah's panic when he'd first mentioned the test, her desperate attempts to dissuade him over text and voicemail, the way she'd moved in with her sister immediately after their confrontation, taking Michael with her. Inside the lab, the process was clinical and quick. A cheek swab from him, another from Michael during what Sarah thought was just a routine doctor's visit. The technician explained they'd have results within a week. "This is crazy," Sarah said for the 100th time as they drove home from the pediatrician's office. "I can't believe you're doing this to our family over some vindictive lie from your ex-wife." Leo glanced in the rearview mirror at Michael, who was quietly playing with a toy truck in his car seat. The boy he'd read bedtime stories to, taught to walk, comforted through nightmares. The son who might not be his son at all. "If it's a lie, the test will prove it," Leo said quietly. "And if it doesn't? If somehow the test is wrong? What then, Leo? You're going to throw away 3 years of being Michael's father over a piece of paper? If the test shows he's not mine, then I was never his father to begin with. I was just a man you let believe a lie." Sarah fell silent, staring out the passenger window. When they reached her sister's house, she got out without another word, gathering Michael and his things with sharp, efficient movements. "Daddy go?" Michael asked, reaching for Leo as Sarah carried him toward the house. The word daddy hit Leo like a physical blow. "I'll see you soon, buddy," he managed, though he wasn't sure it was true. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Leo threw himself into work, staying late at job sites and losing himself in the physical demands of construction. But at night, alone in his too quiet house, the doubt and rage took turns eating him alive. He'd called Dr. Mitchell's office, confirming what Bridget had told him. The fertility test results were real, had been filed away in his medical records for 7 years. The nurse who'd spoken with him had been apologetic. There had been some confusion with the original reporting, and Mrs. Garrett had requested they run additional tests on her instead. Mrs. Garrett. Bridget. Protecting him even when it meant accepting blame for something that wasn't her fault. The call came on a Friday afternoon. Leo was reviewing blueprints when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Mr. Garrett, this is Jennifer from Med Genetic Labs. We have your paternity test results." Leo's hand tightened on the phone. "And the probability of paternity is 0%. The tested male is excluded as the biological father." The words echoed in his head long after he'd hung up. 0%. Not 99% certain, not probable. Absolute. Mathematical impossibility. He drove to Sarah's sister's house in a daze, the printed results folded in his shirt pocket. Sarah answered the door with Michael on her hip, her face immediately reading the truth in his expression. "Leo, we need to talk." She led him to the living room while her sister diplomatically took Michael to play in the backyard. Through the sliding glass door, Leo could see the boy, Sarah's boy, building something with blocks, his small face serious with concentration. "It's true," Leo said without preamble. "He's not mine." Sarah's composure finally cracked. She collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. "It was just a few times. Before we got married. I hoped." "Who is he?" Leo's voice was eerily calm. "The father. It doesn't matter. He doesn't even know Michael exists. It matters to me." Sarah named someone Leo didn't recognize, a bartender from a club she used to frequent. Someone she'd described as meaningless, a mistake she'd made during a rough patch in their engagement. "I love you," she sobbed. "I've always loved you. Michael loves you. You're the only father he's ever known." Built on a lie. Leo pulled out the test results and set them on the coffee table between them. 3 years of my life, Sarah. 3 years of believing I finally had what I'd always wanted. You did have it. You do have it. Biology doesn't make someone a father. Love does. You love Michael, and he loves you. That's real. What's real is that you let me believe he was mine when you knew he might not be. You watched me struggle with fertility issues in my first marriage, watched it destroy me, and you never once thought to mention that you'd been sleeping with someone else. Sarah flinched. I was scared. I thought if you knew you'd leave me. So you trapped me instead. I thought it would work out. I thought we'd be happy. We were happy, Leo said bitterly. I was happy. But it was all based on lies. He stood to leave, but Sarah grabbed his arm. Please don't do this. Don't throw away our family over something that happened before we were even married. Leo looked down at her. This woman he'd thought he loved, who'd given him what he thought was his greatest joy. You want to know the really sick part? If you'd been honest from the beginning, if you'd told me there was a chance Michael wasn't mine, I might have stayed anyway. I loved you enough to raise another man's child if it meant being with you. But you took that choice away from me. I was protecting you. No. Leo's voice cut through her protest. You were protecting yourself. There's a difference. He walked to the sliding door and knocked gently. Michael looked up from his blocks and ran over, pressing his small hands against the glass with a bright smile. Bye, buddy, Leo whispered, his throat closing around the words. The divorce proceedings were swift and ugly. Sarah fought for everything, the house, alimony, child support for a child that wasn't his. Her lawyers painted Leo as a heartless man, abandoning an innocent child, while his attorney argued that fraud negated any financial obligations beyond what the court mandated for Michael's care during the transition period. In the end, Leo kept the house and his business, but the legal fees and settlement left him financially strained. More devastating was the emotional cost. The man who had spent years believing he was finally living the life he was meant to live now found himself more alone than he'd ever been. He started drinking. Not enough to lose his job, but enough to numb the rage and betrayal that consumed his waking hours. Mike tried to help, taking him out, setting him up on dates, but Leo couldn't shake the feeling that everything was contaminated by lies and disappointment. You need to talk to someone, Mike said one evening as they sat at their usual bar. A therapist or something. This isn't healthy. What's the point? Leo stared into his whiskey glass. Every woman I've ever loved has lied to me. Bridget lied about her fertility problems. Sarah lied about Michael's paternity. Maybe I'm just the kind of man who attracts liars. Or maybe you're the kind of man who makes it hard for women to tell you the truth. Leo looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Mike sighed. Look, I love you like a brother, but you've got a temper when things don't go your way. And you've got this thing about being the man, being in control. Maybe these women lied because they were scared of how you'd react to the truth. So it's my fault Sarah cheated on me? It's not about fault. It's about patterns. You divorce Bridget because she can't have kids, then marry the first woman who gets pregnant. You build your whole identity around being a father, then fall apart when you find out the kid isn't yours. Maybe the problem isn't that people lie to you. Maybe it's that you make your love conditional on things they can't control. Leo wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He thought about Bridget sitting in fertility clinics, enduring his blame and resentment while knowing the truth could destroy him. He thought about Sarah, young and scared, hoping her deception would secure a future with a man she loved but didn't trust with the truth. "I need another drink," he said instead. But Mike's words followed him home that night, echoing in his empty house where photos of his fake family still smiled down from the walls. For the first time since Bridget had appeared on his doorstep with her envelope of truths, Leo began to wonder if the problem wasn't that he couldn't trust the women in his life. Maybe the problem was that they couldn't trust him. Chapter 6. Rock Bottom and Redemption Attempts. 6 months after his second divorce, Leo Garrett sat in his truck outside Bridget's office building in Millbrook, a bottle of whiskey empty on the passenger seat and his life in ruins around him. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and he was drunk enough that the world had taken on that soft-edged quality that made everything seem manageable. He'd driven the 3 hours without really planning to, propelled by a combination of liquid courage and the crushing weight of loneliness. The business was hemorrhaging money thanks to his drinking and erratic behavior. His few remaining friends had grown tired of his bitter rants about lying women and false promises. The house felt like a mausoleum filled with the ghosts of 2 failed marriages. Through the office window, he could see Bridget at her desk, her dark hair pulled back in a professional ponytail, her attention focused on her computer screen. She looked successful, put together, like someone who had figured out how to build a life worth living. The sight of her competence made his own failures feel even more acute. Leo climbed out of the truck, steadying himself against the door before walking toward the building. The receptionist tried to stop him, but he pushed past with the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Bridget." She looked up from her work, and her expression immediately shifted from surprise to concern. "Leo, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you." His words slurred slightly at the edges. "Are you drunk?" "Does it matter?" He slumped into the chair across from her desk. "You were right, about everything. Sarah, Michael, all of it." Bridget's office smelled like success, fresh coffee, expensive paper, the subtle perfume of someone who had her life together. It made Leo feel even more like the failure he'd become. "I know," she said gently. "I heard about the divorce." "Did you hear about the rest? How she fought for child support for a kid that wasn't mine? How she told everyone I abandoned my family?" Leo laughed bitterly. "Course, you probably think I deserved it." "I don't think you deserved any of it." Bridget's voice was careful, professional. "But Leo, you can't be here like this. You're drunk, and this is my workplace." "Right. Professional Bridget, successful Bridget, the woman who built a whole new life after I threw her away." He leaned forward, trying to focus on her face. "Do you know what I've been thinking about?" "Leo, I've been thinking about that night when I came home with the divorce papers. You asked if our marriage meant nothing, and I said it meant something but not enough. Do you remember that?" Bridget's composure slipped slightly. "Yes." "I was wrong. It meant everything. You meant everything. And I was too proud and too stupid to see it." "You need to go home," Bridget said firmly. "Sleep this off. We can talk when you're sober." "When I'm sober, I don't have the courage to tell you how sorry I am." Leo's voice cracked. "I blamed you for something that wasn't your fault. I called you broken when you were protecting me from the truth. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too much of a coward to handle reality." "Leo, please, forgive me." The words came out as a whisper. "Please, Bridget. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway." Bridget stared at him for a long moment, and Leo saw something flicker across her face. Pain, maybe. or the ghost of old love. But when she spoke, her voice was steady and final. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Go home, Leo. Get sober. Figure out who you want to be. But don't come back here looking for me to fix what's broken in your life." Security arrived then, summoned by the nervous receptionist. Leo didn't resist as they escorted him to the parking lot, but he turned back once to see Bridget watching from her office window, her face unreadable. That night, alone in his empty house, Leo made a decision. If Bridget wouldn't see him as a drunk, he'd get sober. If she thought he was broken, he'd figure out how to fix himself. And if she believed he was incapable of real change, he'd prove her wrong. The next morning, he called a treatment center. 60 days later, Leo stood on Bridget's front porch in Millbrook, holding a small potted plant and a letter he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. He was sober, showered, and terrified. She answered the door in jeans and a soft sweater, looking more relaxed than she had at the office, but her expression remained guarded when she saw him. "I'm sober," he said before she could speak. 63 days. "I'm glad to hear that. I've been going to meetings and therapy. Turns out you were right. I do make it hard for people to tell me the truth." Bridget didn't invite him in, but she didn't close the door either. "What do you want, Leo?" "To apologize. Really apologize. Not the drunk rambling I did at your office." He held out the plant. "It's time. I remembered you always wanted to grow herbs, but I said they'd make the kitchen smell weird." She took the plant but didn't soften. Apology noted. "I know you don't owe me anything," Leo continued. "I know I hurt you in ways I'm only starting to understand. But I want you to know that every day I stayed sober was because I was trying to become the man who deserved your love the first time around. Leo, I'm not asking for a second chance. I'm just asking you to know that I finally understand what I lost. And I'm sorry it took me so many years and so much pain to figure it out." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "The plant will die if I keep it inside." Leo looked back. "Then plant it outside. Let it grow." Over the following months, Leo made the drive to Millbrook every few weeks. Not to see Bridget, she'd made it clear she needed space, but to attend AA meetings in her town, to volunteer at a local food bank, to slowly rebuild his relationship with the community where she lived. He sold his truck and bought a modest sedan. He downsized to a smaller house and used the equity to pay off his debts. He learned to cook, started reading again, took up running. Piece by piece, he constructed a life that wasn't built around his need to prove his worth to others. Sometimes he caught glimpses of Bridget around town, at the grocery store, at the coffee shop, walking through the park where he sometimes ran. She was polite when their paths crossed, but distant, professional, like someone being careful not to encourage unwanted attention. It was Dr. Patterson, his therapist, who finally asked the question Leo had been avoiding. "What happens if she never forgives you?" Leo was quiet for a long moment. "Then I keep trying to be better anyway, because the work isn't really about her anymore. It's about me becoming someone I can live with." "And if she does forgive you?" "Then maybe I'll be worthy of it." The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday in October, almost a year after his last drink. Leo was leaving an AA meeting when he saw Bridget struggling with a flat tire in the parking lot across the street. Her hands were muddy, her clothes soaked, and she looked on the verge of frustrated tears. He approached carefully, the way someone might approach a wounded animal. "Need help?" She looked up, rain dripping from her hair. For a moment he thought she'd refuse. Then she nodded. "I called AAA, but they're backed up because of the weather." Leo knelt beside her car, examining the flat tire. "I can change this. Won't take long." They worked in relative silence, Leo handling the heavy lifting while Bridget held the flashlight. When he finished, she stood there in the rain, studying his face in the dim light. "Thank you," she said finally. "You're welcome." They stood there for another moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like the rain clouds overhead. "Leo," she said softly. "The man who just changed my tire? Is this who you really are now?" He considered the question seriously. "I'm trying to be. Every day, I'm trying to be someone worth trusting." Bridget nodded slowly. "I can see that." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was recognition. And for Leo, that was enough to keep trying. Chapter 7. Rebuilding Trust and New Beginnings. 2 years after changing Bridget's tire in the rain, Leo Garrett sat across from her at a small cafe in Millbrook, watching her read the legal documents he'd placed on the table between them. Her coffee had grown cold as she studied each page, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that might have been the beginning of forgiveness. "You sold your mother's house," she said finally, looking up at him. "The house you grew up in." "I sold it to Marcus Development Group for their new project," Leo confirmed. "The check is made out to Bridget Chen Marketing Solutions. It should be enough to expand your business the way you've been planning." Bridget stared at the check, more money than she'd ever seen in one place, enough to hire staff, lease a proper office space, maybe even open a second location. "Leo, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can." His voice was steady, calm in a way that spoke of hard-won peace. "It's not a bribe or a manipulation. It's an investment in someone I believe in." "Your mother loved that house. She raised you there." "She did. And before she died, she told me that the best investment she ever made was in people, not property." Leo leaned forward slightly. "She would have loved seeing you build something meaningful with this money." Over the past 2 years, their relationship had slowly, carefully evolved from polite acknowledgement to genuine friendship. Leo had proven his sobriety and commitment to change through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. He'd learned to listen without trying to fix, to apologize without expecting immediate forgiveness, to show up without demanding attention. "There's a condition," he said quietly. Bridget raised an eyebrow. "I knew it was too good to be true." "Let me take you to dinner. A real dinner, not coffee or running into each other at the farmer's market. A date." "Leo, one dinner. If you hate every minute of it, I'll respect that and we'll never speak of it again. But if there's even a chance that we could build something new together, something honest this time, then maybe we owe it to ourselves to try." Bridget looked at the check again, then at the man across from her. The Leo she'd divorced would have demanded, cajoled, or manipulated. This Leo was asking, with no guarantee of getting what he wanted. "Why now?" she asked. "Why, after all this time, do you think we could make it work?" "Because I finally understand what love actually means," Leo said. "It's not about getting what you want from someone. It's about wanting the best for them, even when that's painful for you. You loved me that way once when you protected me from the truth about my fertility. I want the chance to love you that way now." The dinner was at a small Italian restaurant, nothing fancy or presumptuous. They talked about safe things at first, her business, his work, books they'd been reading. But gradually, inevitably, the conversation turned to deeper waters. "I need you to know," Leo said over dessert, "that I understand now why you hid those test results. You were trying to protect me from something you thought would destroy me." "It did destroy you eventually," Bridget replied, "just not in the way I expected." "No, what destroyed me was my own pride and stubbornness. You gave me a gift, years of believing I was capable of fathering children. Even if it wasn't true, it let me feel whole for a while. But it was built on a lie." "It was built on love," Leo corrected. "A complicated, imperfect love, but love nonetheless." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of old wounds finally beginning to feel less heavy. "What would be different this time?" Bridget asked. "If we tried again, what would keep us from making the same mistakes?" Leo had clearly thought about this question. "We'd start with the truth, all of it. No protecting each other from difficult realities, no making decisions for each other out of fear. And adoption? Children. If you want children, we'll adopt. If you don't, we won't. The decision would be ours to make together, based on what we actually want, not on some image of what I think a family should look like. It wasn't a proposal, not yet, but it was the foundation of one, built on understanding rather than assumption. They dated for 6 months, taking their time, learning each other again. Leo went to therapy twice a week and invited Bridget to join him for couples counselling. They talked about everything: their marriage, their divorce, their separate journeys through heartbreak and healing. The proposal, when it came, was simple. They were walking through the same park where they'd had their first date 10 years earlier, and Leo stopped beside the pond where they'd once fed ducks together. "I want to marry you again," he said, pulling a simple ring from his pocket. "Not because I need you to complete me, but because I choose you. Every day, knowing exactly who you are and who I am. I choose you. Even knowing we can't have biological children? Especially knowing that, because it means any family we build will be intentional, chosen, wanted in the deepest way possible." Bridget said yes, but with conditions. They would have a long engagement. They would continue counselling. They would adopt a child only when they were both certain they were ready, not because they felt they should. The wedding was small, held in Bridget's backyard with only their closest friends and family present. Leo's best man was his sponsor from AA. Bridget's maid of honour was Meredith, who cried through the entire ceremony. As they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, Leo spoke about second chances and the courage to love without guarantees. Bridget talked about forgiveness and the difference between loving someone despite their flaws and loving them because of their complete humanity. "I promise," Leo said, his voice steady despite his tears, "to trust you with the truth, even when it's difficult. To support your dreams, even when they're different from mine. To love you not for what you can give me, but for who you are." "I promise," Bridget replied, "to trust you with my whole heart, even though that's scary. To tell you the truth, even when I think it might hurt you. To build a life with you based on who we actually are, not who we think we should be." They honeymooned in Ireland, visiting small villages and staying in bed and breakfasts where no one knew their story. It was there, in a cottage overlooking the sea, that they made the decision to start the adoption process. "I want to meet our child," Bridget said one morning over breakfast. "Not a baby necessarily, but a child who's old enough to choose us back." They were matched with Emma, a 6-year-old girl who had been in foster care for 2 years after her teenage mother proved unable to care for her. Emma was bright, cautious, and had learned not to trust adults who made promises they couldn't keep. The adoption process took 8 months of visits, paperwork, and careful relationship building. Emma tested them constantly, pushing boundaries to see if they would send her back when things got difficult. Leo and Bridget met each challenge with patience and consistency, showing up every week whether Emma was happy to see them or hiding under a table. "Why do you want me?" Emma asked one day during a visit to the zoo. "Because you're ours," Bridget said simply. "We don't know how we know, but we do. You belong with us." "What if I'm bad?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Leo replied. "That's what families do." The day the adoption was finalized, Emma stood between them in the courtroom, holding both their hands as the judge declared them a legal family. Leo thought about his mother, gone now for 7 years, and knew she would have loved this moment. That evening, as they tucked Emma into her new bedroom in their house, she looked up at them with the solemn expression of a child who had learned that life could change without warning. "Are you going to stay married this time?" she asked. Leo and Bridget exchanged a look over her head, sharing the weight of that question and their commitment to the answer. "Yes," they said together. "We're going to stay married this time." 6 months later, Leo stood in the cemetery where his mother was buried, Emma's small hand in his, Bridget beside him holding a bouquet of flowers from their garden, including thyme, which had grown into a healthy bush despite his initial skepticism. "Grandma Edith," Emma said solemnly, addressing the headstone, "Daddy says you would have liked me." "She would have loved you," Leo corrected gently. just like we do. As they walked back to the car, Emma skipping ahead while Leo and Bridget followed hand in hand, Leo reflected on the long journey that had brought them here. 2 marriages, 2 divorces, years of mistakes and misunderstandings, betrayals and forgiveness, all of it leading to this moment of simple contentment. "Do you think she knows?" Bridget asked quietly, nodding toward the cemetery. "Your mother, I mean. Do you think she knows we kept her promise?" Leo squeezed her hand. "I think she knew we'd find our way back to each other eventually. Maybe not how or when, but somehow. Even when we couldn't see it ourselves?" "Especially then," Leo said. "That's what real love does. It believes in possibilities even when everything seems impossible." Emma ran back to them then, full of 6-year-old energy and questions about dinner and homework and whether they could get a dog. Leo lifted her onto his shoulders while Bridget laughed at something their daughter said, and for the first time in his life, Leo understood what it meant to have enough. Not because he'd gotten everything he'd once thought he wanted, but because he'd learned to want what he actually had. A wife who loved him completely, a daughter who had chosen them as much as they'd chosen her, and a second chance built on the solid foundation of truth. As they drove home through the autumn evening, Leo caught Bridget's eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. She smiled back, and in that simple exchange was the promise they'd made to each other and to Emma. They were a family now, imperfect and intentional and real. The past had been forgiven. The future was uncertain but bright with possibility. And the present, this moment, this car, this love, was more than enough.